Good afternoon, class. In today's video, what I wanted to do is to talk about the sound of music. For those of you who caught that reference, very good. For those of you who did it, go check out that movie. It's a really good one. So what I wanted to do today was to talk about the two different types of instruments in this universe. There are only two types. That is going to be the answer for. That's going to be the answer that I'm going to stick with. In this universe, there are two types of instruments: strings and pipes. And so, because everything else that you can think of, I'm sure you can throw a bunch of examples at me, they would all fit under those categories. For example, you might say, well, what about a drum, a violin, a bass, a cello? I would say all of those are generally strings. Even a xylophone, for example. At least like the xylophones are like the little they make for babies. Those ones are generally strings because, and I'll go over why that is later. Versus other things like trumpets, clarinets, flutes, saxophones, French horns, bassoons. All of those are generally going to be pipes. So those are your. That's why I can lump almost all of the brass and the woodwind instruments into pipes, and almost all of the other, and all of the stringed instruments into obviously strings. But we do need to go over, before we go over some examples of what those look like, I'm going to first go over the equations that govern how music and how sound forms, in general. So this is what it looks like. In a string, when you want to find the frequency of the note, or the frequency of the sound that you're producing, which to all the music people out there is the note that you want to hit. What you would need to do is you need to find the integer that note is going to play at. You're going to need to know the length of the string, and you're going to need to know the speed of sound in that string. And to give you a couple of examples of that, and this harkens back to even my days when I was in the orchestra here at Moanalo High School. One of the things that I had to, one of the stories that I would hear from my music teacher was that when we would go to our orchestra camps, they would always tell us, you have to be careful how you tune. Be very cognizant of how well you tune to not just your instrument so that it's in tune, but how you tune with each other in the orchestra, because especially when we're at places like Camp Erdman, that would be where we're right next to the beach, and there's a high amount of salt and humidity, and it's not, the temperature is obviously going to be different. Because of that temperature difference, our stringed instruments will tend to loosen, and so they will tend to get flat, as we're using musical terms. Whereas the brass instruments will start to get sharp as they start to lengthen. So that's why whenever we have my music teachers would always tell me, make sure everything is in tune, and we're going to tune often just to make sure that we're always checking with each other, because especially when the full orchestra is together, the brass instruments will get sharper, the stringed instruments will get flatter, and that'll create a really it'll create not chaos, but more like there won't be any harmony between the sets of instruments. So that's, unless of course that's why there's the main differences between strings and pipes. So for a string, you would need to know that the length of the string actually matters. So which is why if you're ever tuning, let's say, a violin or something, if you ever loosened it, you are increasing the length of that string, which is going to decrease the frequency that you're going to be able to pull out of it, which means it's going to be flatter. Whereas if you tighten it, this length gets shorter and the frequency gets higher. So you can get different strings based on that. And that's like I explained earlier with the speed of sound. That's why the speed of sound is very important, and that's why it matters depending on where you're at. And that's why if you've ever noticed at any concert, the musicians will always warm up, and it's actually really important that everybody in the orchestra warms up, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of people being out of tune with each other. And it's not just being out of tune just by yourself. It's being out of tune with the rest of the orchestra as well. So that's one of the things that's really important, because of that speed of sound. And of course, even with some of the stories that I even heard from my music teacher in high school, also was that with the pipes, when the orchestra went, or when the band went to London, they would have to warm up because it was very cold when they were doing their parade. When they would march in a parade, and they had to warm up quite a bit because otherwise all of their instruments would be completely out of tune, because as the instruments got warmer, the metal was lengthening a little bit, was stretching and compressing a little bit more as it warmed up. And it was only when they were warmed up that the instruments were finally able to be tuned so that they could actually play the music that they had practiced, at a different temperature. So with that, so let's go on to pipes. What are the two types of pipes? And this includes flutes, trumpets, clarinets, bassoons, saxophones. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing a bunch, so please forgive me if I have, if I missed out on your favorite instrument. But these are just your general pipes, piped instruments. That's what you've got. There is one difference, so because between a pipe and that's open on both ends and one that's closed on one end, and the way that we figured that out is because what you do is you take a trumpet. Let's say you take a trumpet, and for those of you who play trumpet, you know that sometimes you have a mute with you, and you put the mute into the bell of the trumpet, and that changes how all of your notes get played. By the way, full disclosure, I'm a violin and cello player myself, so if I got my trumpet parts wrong, I do apologize for that. Now, what is the difference, though, between a pipe open on both ends and a pipe closed on one end? Well, with a pipe open on both ends, what I just described for a string is, as you can see, the exact same thing. There you will get a whole bunch of notes. With a pipe that is closed on one end, however, so for a muted trumpet, that's actually going to change. The equation changes where the integer is now, because what you notice here is that the integer here is n equals 1, 2, 3. So you can definitely get all of the every note that you want, and it'll go up in an even amount of in a regular interval amount of steps. Whereas with a muted instrument, it's only going to go up based on an odd number of integers. So you won't actually get a nice jump between notes once you've actually gotten once you've closed off the instrument a little bit. That's not to say that that's not acceptable. Sometimes that's exactly how you get the sound that you want. So it just depends on what your on what the song is asking for, and what the group is actually, what the band or the orchestra is actually looking for in the type of sound that you're trying to produce. So that's why when I made to, while I did give a couple of anecdotes right there, I did actually also go over some of those examples too. Because what is a string? So it's like violins as well as drums. Flutes or clarinets are pipes open on both ends. Trumpets with the mute in it are pipes that are closed on one end. But of course, we should also go over just one more thing before we end this video, which is, what is a stringed instrument and how is it different from a pipe? So a stringed instrument is when the whole object vibrates, when it is the instrument itself that is vibrating. So I'm going to be using this as my example. This is just a meter stick, so this wouldn't count as, it can't count as both a string or a pipe, but it can be something. So this will definitely be a string, because if I hit it, you can hear a sound coming from it, and that sound is because the meter stick itself is vibrating. Okay. Now, if I were to try to play this as if it was like a flute or something, or a clarinet, let's say, right? And I was to push air through this like that, then what would happen is, I mean, that won't happen with this because this doesn't have any holes in it for air to move through. But if this was a pipe, what would happen is, as I blow air through it, the air, based on where I put my fingers in the holes, would actually cause a vibration inside would take shape inside of the cavity of the pipe. So a pipe, by definition, is when air gets shaped by or the frequency of the air changes based on the shape of the pipe itself, versus a stringed instrument only depends on the length of the string or the length of the instrument itself, because the whole instrument is vibrating. So that's the difference between a stringed instrument and a piped instrument. So which are again the only two types of musical instruments in this universe. So that concludes how to think about sound as well as it turns into music. Good luck in your studies, and may the force be with you.